This past weekend, Ontario Liberals met for the first time since their devastating loss in June. Party members took a hard look at the last election campaign and their place in Ontario's political future. Here for their takeaways, Tim Murphy. He's Managing Director of the Macmillan Vantage Policy Group and co-chair of the 2018 Ontario Liberal election campaign. And Kate Graham is here. She was the Liberal candidate in the riding of London North Centre. She also chaired the party's so-called Listening Project team. More on that in a bit. First of all, welcome to you. First time on this program.
Thank you for having me.
Tim, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
First time caller, many time. How does that go?
Never mind. Often watcher.
Did the Liberal Party, in your view, deserve to lose the last election as badly as it did?
No.
Why do you say?
Well, I mean, look, it's because I think it offered excellent government, great policy, stupendous candidates. So the re-election prospect of a premier, I think, who was genuine, intelligent, cared about the province and its future. So when I look at all of that package, it was a package I was very proud to be part of the team presenting to the voters. But look, voters make the call, and that's what's great about democracy. And they decided we deserved, some time out of the hallways of power.
I think that your interim leader, John Fraser, said time in the penalty box, which he then went on to say, and the voters were right to do so. So you don't really agree with his assessment?
No, I guess I don't.
And you're okay with that?
I am okay with that. But look, that's people will have, the result was not a very pleasant one for the party and for many candidates and MPPs who were running for re-election. And look, I think obviously the voters decided it was time for a change, and I never doubt the judgment of voters. And so in the sense that the voters are always right, they were right.
Hugh Segal once said, the voters are always right, but sometimes they're a little excessive. Do you agree with that one?
That is accurate.
That's the one you agree with?
Yes.
Kate, let me do one more with him, and then I'm going to get to you. Obviously, this past weekend's provincial council meeting was a bit of a bloodletting. I mean, it was an opportunity. I don't
agree with that.
You don't agree with that? Okay. Humor me for a second then. It certainly was at the very least an opportunity for members to express their concerns to the people who ran the campaign.
Absolutely.
You do agree with that. And you're one of the people who ran the campaign as a co-chair. I don't know how constructive this is, but let's try anyway. People want to, at least people I talk to, want to get some sense of apportioning blame. How responsible is the Premier? How responsible is the Cabinet? How responsible the MPPs, the Principal Secretary, the Campaign Director, all of that stuff? Have you figured out all of that in your own head yet?
Well, look, I think I have a view of what went right and what went wrong. I think, to be honest with you, I think this was two things were happening out in the electorate that one of them we couldn't fight, and one of them we didn't do enough to deal with. And I think one of them was time for change. Now, that was there in 2014, and we managed to fight back against it. But that was a very significant theme. I think, secondly, there was an anxiety about the cost of living that I think was generating an anxiety about personal futures and children's futures that the government and we as a campaign didn't provide a good enough answer to. And I think Doug Ford did, and in the race of, to be the alternative to Doug Ford, we weren't it. It became the NDP, and so we were squeezed out of that picture as the campaign progressed.
Kate, since the election campaign took place, you have been doing something called the Listening Project. Mm-hmm. What is that?
So I ran as a new candidate. It's my first time running, and losing is hard, but you also learn a lot through that experience. So in the days and weeks following the election, I spoke to other first-time candidates who had run before, and suggested that we create a team and we reach out to every one of the 124 candidates who ran across Ontario.
Did you get to them all?
We've gotten to most of them so far. We're still working on it, but to do a couple things. So to thank them for running, to see how they're doing, because it can be a tough experience, but most importantly to say, you probably heard a few things and learned a few things through this experience that will be helpful to the party going forward.
That's what I want to know. What did you constantly hear at that? I mean, you probably knocked on 30,000 doors.
About 50, yes.
50,000 doors.
Yes.
What did you hear?
So there were a couple of key themes that came out of this listening project that I heard at the door, but candidates all across Ontario heard at the door. So the first one was a sense that the party had stopped listening. And this was expressed in a couple of different ways. Sometimes it was about not listening to voters. There were certainly some parts of Ontario that didn't feel represented, unique priorities and needs that they didn't see being reflected. The second theme that came up a lot was that people weren't sure what we stood for, and particularly in areas where the NDP and the Liberal candidates were seen to be fairly similar, it was tough to distinguish between the two. So that was the second theme. And then the third was around the leader, and the lack of popularity of the Premier was certainly a challenge for candidates all across the province. People certainly acknowledged that for a lot of candidates, the reason they ran was because of Kathleen Wynne and things that she had led. But opposition campaigns and so on for many years had eroded that brand to the point that it became tough for the campaign to overcome. So we heard that from a lot of people.
You ran presumably because you liked Kathleen Wynne as the leader.
Mm-hmm, I do.
I mean, clearly, you see Kathleen Wynne one way, 40% of Ontario, or more, depending on how much beyond the Conservative vote you want to add to that, clearly they see her a different way. Mm-hmm. Why is that disconnect there?
So I ran because the things that I care about, I was seeing great progress in. I care a lot about education. I care about mental health funding. We're finally seeing more investment there. I care about investment in transportation. I'm from Southwestern Ontario, so moving forward on things like high-speed rail, investing in transit in cities like London, really important to me. And those were things that were led under Kathleen Wynne's leadership. So when the opportunity to run for a party that, and I knew this would be tough. It's tough running for a party that's been in power for 15 years, but I believe in those things enough that I wanted to put my name forward. And I was certainly not the only one. We heard that from candidates all across the province.
So how do you account for the fact that so many people, look, we saw this in polls, when they poll all of the popularity of all of the premiers across the country, she was always 10th and a long way from 9th. Mm-hmm. So what didn't you see in her that apparently the rest of the province did?
So I knocked on, I would say thousands of doors where people would say, you seem really great, you seem like a good candidate, but I just can't support you because of your leader. And I would say, okay, tell me what it is. Like, what is it that you don't support about her? And a lot of people had a really tough time articulating what it was. Some people would say, I just don't know, I just don't like her. And there are some big shifts that are happening in politics generally, right? The success of online opposition campaigns and so on can be very powerful, and those are new things being used quite successfully. So for some people, the baggage of 15 years where some things go well, some things don't go well, they lay a lot of that at the feet of the leader, which is, I think, fair and always true. But she was also really personally targeted, and I do think there was some underlying sexism and homophobia that were evident in the campaign and in the way that she was perceived.
I must say, I heard that a lot too when I went door to door with candidates, Tim. I would hear people say, I can't stand Kathleen Wynne, and when I asked them why not, they were often stuck to articulate what that actually meant. Yep. What do you infer from that?
Well, I know, look, absolutely, and we did a lot of, polling work and, both quantitative and qualitative about what we could do to rehabilitate. What was interesting is, and we were finding when we did the focus groups, you'd run through the record and the accomplishments and show some, tape of how she engaged with voters and the issues. And at the end of it, the focus groups were actually all very positive. So we'd always thought we could, frankly, in the right setting, with the second debate being a significant way to reintroduce her to the voters with the, the intelligence and sensitivity, empathy and compassion she brings to bear to it. But, it was just tough. I think one of the things that's happened, and this campaign, I think, is illustrated, and frankly, a little bit of what we see with Trump in the U.S., is there is in the new technologies, the ability to frame negatives is stronger than framing positives. The unhinging of truth and the notion of rules in political discourse from how campaigns are run is really problematic. And so you had this significant social media campaign that was basically created this sense that she was going to lose was inevitable and that she was unpopular. So to a certain degree, she was unpopular because people believed she was unpopular. And when you press why, they couldn't say just because, isn't that true? Everyone thinks that. So that's why I think it's both a homophobia and a sexism. But I don't think I would cast that on every voter who didn't like her. I think that's unfair. But I do think there's this methodology of campaigning now that is all about the negative and that's tough for a centrist party, right? Liberals are in power because they want to fix problems. But there is a real undercurrent in current politics that it's all about who your enemy is right? I want to frame this as you're against me and take away the middle. And so that, I think, going forward is a problem for Liberals.
Liberals want to fix problems, and that can lead to this, what I'm about to read. Because here's from Brian LeBlanc, who's a veteran senior Liberal staffer. I'm sure you both know him. He's worked with several cabinet ministers, and he wrote this on Facebook. Sheldon, go ahead, bring this up. For 5 years, she, Kathleen Wynne, was the only face and the only voice of our government, and our message was often a scold or advice about the way people should live their lives, or some guidance on how they can become better people. And they were sick of it. Our challenge is to get away from the I know what's good for you habit. Is there something to that?
I certainly wouldn't characterize it that way. And if I could go back a little bit to the knocking on doors experience, one thing I heard repeatedly was that people in this election weren't happy with any of the leaders. So, this is framed in some cases as a win or a loss, but I think the message here around change is much bigger than one leader or one party. I think people want to see politics done differently. When they look at leaders and see all of the bickering and the negativity that you talk about, that's not the way the real world works. That's not the way a functional workplace works. When you watch Queen's Park and you see leaders interact in a way that we would suspend kids on a schoolyard for, people have had enough. So for me, it's we can't just lay this on the blame of one simple thing.
No, I hear
think
you.
we need to see a big shift in how politics happens in this province.
Go ahead, Tim.
So, sorry, Brian, I don't agree with you. And here is why. I actually think I think the problem the government had was actually, it had a record of policies that were actually, when tested individually, extremely popular, right? The minimum wage, the drug plan, free tuition, all things that tested, frankly, off the charts extraordinarily positively with conservatives, never mind the general populace. I think the problem we had as a government was actually we were almost doing so many things, not a single thing broke through and penetrated enough, and when it did, it was pretty late. Like, I think probably the most significantly well-known thing the government did was minimum wage, and the fight with Tim Hortons about that. But that was, that was almost 3.5 years in, and so I don't think it was about scolding people. I think, the Premier carried some baggage around a number of issues, so there tends to be a sense of you're defending a record, and that can look bad. But the problem is I don't think we had enough that we communicated that was positive, that was focused enough for people to understand, oh, this is a government about X, and I know they're about X because I've seen this done, and this done.
Did you want to add to that, Kate?
I was just going to, similar comments. I think we need to own that often we didn't do a good job of explaining to people why decisions were made. Politics is all about tough choices where often there are two or more good sides to the story. And so we need to do a better job of communicating with people honestly. There were tough issues raised during the election campaign. And I heard a lot of voters just say, I didn't really know why the decisions were made about hydro or other things. Minimum wage, business owners concerned about that. We need to ensure that politics is a place where you can have an open conversation about both the good sides and the bad sides of every decision, so it doesn't feel like a sales pitch or just ripping down the other side all the time. It needs to be more of a balanced conversation.
Did you, when you went to doors, hear that the partial privatization of Hydro One was something people did not like?
Yes.
They did
absolutely.
mention that?
Yes, this came up a lot. I would say hydro, just generally, both the cost of hydro and also the partial privatization was the most frequently raised policy issue at the door that people were angry about. The second most raised issue would be mental health and the hospital system and healthcare. And neither of those are simple things. They're not things that in 15 seconds you could say, and here's why this was right. They're complex issues with lots of considerations. We need to do a better job of being able to express the complexity of that in a way that people feel like they're a part of the decision. So I think that's an area where we can continue to grow.
Isn't she great?
Yeah.
Kate for leader. Kate for leader.
Are you already pushing her to run again next time?
Yes.
You are?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you could do that on your own time. I've got my own agenda here, if you don't mind. No pun intended. All right, so you've gone on the listening tour. You are starting to get feedback from the candidates who ran for office. Tim, I mean, you've been involved in, I think, pretty much every election campaign the Liberals have run for the last 30 plus years. So what's the first step you need to take to get this train back on the tracks? What do you say?
Well, I think Kate and the group's exercise and listening project is absolutely, stage one. Need to go out and, help heal the party, get it re-engaged. I think, one of the things that was problematic in my view for the party was as, time and power does this, is the the mechanics of a party get more and more concentrated in the hands of staffers and ex-staffers and less in true volunteers. And so you need to re-engage and re-embolden those people, and a listing project is absolutely crucial to that. And then we obviously got to, continue to build our fundraising efforts, because, it's a sad truth that having enough money to communicate your message matters. And then we obviously got to get around to electing a new leader. And, rightly or wrongly, a lot of politics is leader-focused these days. And so the energy of a new leader at some point in the next year and a half or two is another important step to present the kind of, that new face to the electorate, to be able to be a coalescing force for what we think are the better answers than being offered by the current government to Ontario.
I hear the party's $9 million in debt. Is that right?
I actually don't know the number, but I think what I do know is that we were basically kind of where we expected to be in terms of the overall debt. We had we've had a plan to rebuild based on the combination of how much we were going to get out of the rebates, and so we are on that plan. So we expect to be fine.
Can I ask you, in Saskatchewan, the former Progressive Conservative Party became so distrusted as a brand at a certain point. Now, mind you, someone went to jail, there were scandals galore. They just disbanded. They just walked away from all their debts, and they said, we are rebranding as the Saskatchewan Party, and they're the government today. Yep. So we know that route can work. Are Ontario Liberals thinking about that approach at all?
Not at all.
Zero?
No.
That is not going to happen?
Zero, nothing.
There's a tendency to overread into wins and overread into losses. There were still 1.2 million Ontarians who voted for Liberal candidates. Even in the polls right after the election, you saw the numbers go up, and I think part of it was that the anger had been diffused. And so we certainly have a lot of work to do. We need to show voters that we heard the message of this election. We are prepared to change in the ways that was very clearly expressed at the door and in the election result.
Ironically, your premier changed the fundraising rules to make them so much tougher that the job of getting this party back into the black is going to be, 25 times harder than it was a year ago.
There's no question those changes are difficult. Yes.
But one of the things to, I was party president and campaign co-chair in 1999 when we lost that election. Now, the result wasn't quite as bad.
You got 40% of the vote in that election.
Well, we didn't get quite 40%, but if we had 40, we would have won more. Well, actually, but in any event, my point being is a different one, which is I went to the provincial council meeting, which is what just happened this past weekend. After that election, there were 120 people in that room, right, for the event afterwards. And I went to this one. There was 800 people. There was standing room only for this, which is a good sign about people saying, we want to gather together and rebuild. We think there's something here worth working on and building together.
I'm nerdy enough to want to know, because it's true. You're the president of the party. When Dalton McGuinty led them for the first time, they came second.
Correct.
Okay, someone in the control room, please Google the results of the 1999 election. Tell me what percentage of the total vote the Ontario Liberals got, because I guess the point I'm trying to make is you did you placed a good second in 1999.
Yes, we did.
You placed an awful third this time.
The party's been third before, as you know.
Not in 40 years.
1975, we came third.
Right. So it was 40%? I love when that happens.
Yes.
That so almost never happens.
I do know that we knew that if we had 10,000 votes in 99 placed in the right writings, we would have won this.
You might have won. That was Mike Harris' second one.
Yeah.
Okay, let me follow up with you on this. He joked a second ago about Kate for leader, but at a certain point, people are going to be putting their minds, after they think about getting over the loss and after they think about how they're going to rebrand and raise money for this party, they are going to start to focus on who's going to be the leader. And, it's a 10-year project, which means you probably can't be 70 years old if you want to run for leader. You're kind of the right age, so I'll just put it out there.
There is no announcement here. I think we are doing a very responsible thing.
That's not a no.
I think we need to start by hearing the message of this election before we think about leader. John Fraser did a great job this weekend. He was very humble. He spoke about the loss that we all experienced, made a few jokes about the minivan party and so on, and really got the crowd energized.
Bring that up? Go ahead, bring that up. Hang on, let's bring up the button. Start the van. Yes. We've got work to do. The Tories have said you guys are the minivan party because you can fit the whole caucus in a minivan. You are embracing that, I guess?
He started his speech by making what I thought was just a brilliant joke about this, and he spoke about how Ford in the House had referred to him as being the leader of the minivan party. He took great offense to that. He said, because I'm the interim leader of the minivan party. And you know what, it was a great tone to strike because, you know, obviously everyone is disappointed by the result, but there is still a lot of optimism and energy in that room, and he was able to really draw that out of the crowd. And I think what we're seeing happen now that you know the landscape has shifted so dramatically, is there is a lot of grassroots level organizing, energizing. Even in London North Centre, we had people join the Riding Association the day after the election.
Well, let me finish up on this. I got 30 seconds left, Tim. Let me give it to you. Why would anybody want to be the leader of the Liberal Party of Ontario right now, given all of the massive challenges you've got on so many different fronts?
Well, because, you know, and this is true of almost every person who runs for office, regardless of party, because they believe that the values and ideas and team they're going to bring to the table are going to create a better future than the people in power. And I think there are lots of really good people in the party, in the current caucus, and others who will want to lead that effort. And I think that's a great thing, and I actually am optimistic for the future.
You think she's going to run for leader?
She will one day.
I think we're going to see a lot of people run for leader. It's going to be a really good sign of confidence.
She's got the line down pat already. There we go.
Good.
That's Tim Murphy, who is the co-chair, one of the co-chairs of the Ontario Liberal effort in 2018, and Kate Graham, who was the party's candidate in London North Centre and chairs the Listening Project team. Thanks much to both of you for coming on TVO tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.